All right, now I get a chance at it.
There you go. Let's.
September 9th, 2007, we're going to talk to Kim Hobbs.
Okay, my name is Kim Lyman Hobbs. My father was Charles Lyman Hobbs. The first thing I'd like to say is if my father was here, there wouldn't be any tape rolling because he wouldn't talk to you. The 50th anniversary or this or that, and our town newspaper approached the local veterans to tell their stories, and he politely told them there are several heroes out there and go find one and they'll tell you a story. But he did not care to talk. And I finally got him to this organization, this 376 organization in 1995. And in coming into a room with 3 first pilots and radio operator and people that he actually flew missions with, he opened a door that he never closed. But all these stories that I'm telling are stories that I got in the 3 years and the thousands of miles that I drove him to and from reunions. My father was born in December 1919, and he was the son of a pioneer that my great-grandfather came down from Indiana and left land and a house. He was one of several sons, so instead of waiting for his inheritance, he came down in the land run of 1889 and started his family, and my father was his grandson. There were 2 boys. My father was the oldest son, and he had a younger brother that was a little more headstrong than my father. The younger brother said, "You enlist first." He said, "Because if I enlist, your parents, our mom and dad, are put the guilt on you, and they'll talk you out of it. But nobody's going to talk me out of nothing. So you enlist first, and then I'll go." My father graduated out of high school, top of his class, spent 1 year at the University of Oklahoma, and did well, enjoyed it, but his parents couldn't really afford to send him to college, and so he went back to the farm. And after a year of working with his father, my grandfather was a hard man. My great-grandfather put together 3,500 acres and businesses in town and a house, but after the Depression, by 1932, everything was mortgaged to the hilt. So his son, my grandfather, took out an FHA loan in 1932 for $50,000 and paid all the notes. He gave his father a house that was free and clear, an insurance business to run, and assumed the note on all the businesses and this 3,500 acres, and then moved out onto what we call the Hobbs Ranch and proceeded for the next 20 years to try and pay that note off. So he was a hard man and had to be that way. But my father was very proud of him for his business sense and his work ethic. But being proud of somebody doesn't necessarily make it easy to live with him. In 1941, around harvest time, back then you shocked hay, and you had tongs that would come and grab these shocks. And my father was trying to tell his father that we need to do something with this rope. You need to slow down, Dad. We need to stop. And he kept on going and lifted the shock with this load of hay up into the air, and the rope broke, and so several hundred pounds came down about a foot away from my dad. And my dad figured, he said, at that point, I thought, if I'm going to get killed, why not be paid for it? So he went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and enlisted in September of 1941. And he said things moved pretty slow up until Pearl Harbor. He said then they took off. So he took the basic tests and was admitted to flight school, did his groundwork, basics at Bonham, Texas, then went to San Angelo, and then graduated out of cadet school at Lubbock, Texas in the class of 42H. He made a good friend. He said his best friend in Lubbock. He said he was one of 2 people that he knew that had a premonition that they were going to die. And I didn't learn later until after my father began to talk that the second person was my father. But a week before graduating, this fellow named Duke Harrison told my father, he said, I don't think I'm going to make it. And Dad said, what are you talking about? We're going across stage. And he says, I just don't think I'm going to make it. And Duke was in the commissary being measured for his flight uniform, for his officer's suit. And the next class was practicing flying formation for the ceremony of the graduation, and two of the primary trainers collided, and one of them went into the commissary and killed my dad's friend, Duke Harrison. And so everybody else at these reunions, I'm sure, has a story of Saturday nights and getting a couple of drinks and having a good time. But my dad, I think, after that experience, everything was serious for him. This was not about fun. My dad picked up his crew in Topeka, Kansas, and he told a story that they were practicing flying in Clovis, New Mexico, and the instructor that was flying the plane said, here, watch this, and they buzzed a windmill and dove down towards it and pulled up, cleared the windmill with the nose, but the tail section went down and tore the top off the windmill. And my father took responsibility, because he wasn't going to point the finger at the instructor, because he wanted to pass. He didn't want to get the instructor mad at him. So he and his crew had to march the parade grounds as penance for tearing up the windmill. But he went to, when he picked up his crew, he told them, he said, now boys, I'm in charge, and if anyone has any problems with that, well, just come on ahead, one at a time, and we'll settle it right now. And nobody stepped forward. And he didn't mention any other, he mentioned they had one crew member that they had to give a GI bath when they were flying down to Brazil and over to Africa. Before they got to Brazil, being that close to him on the plane, they gave him a GI bath. But other than that, he didn't mention any problems with his crew. My father flew his first combat mission with an experienced pilot when he got to Africa. That pilot was Paul Fallon. So Mr. Fallon was on the left-hand seat, which my dad normally sat at. And so my dad was on the right-hand seat. He said I had a pigskin glove on my right hand that I worked the throttles with. He said, now I was sitting on the left-hand seat. He said, my first mission, he said, I stuck the right wing into the window of the plane beside us, right through the waist gunner's window. And when he went forward, I went forward. When he slowed down, I slowed down. Then when we came off the target, I moved away. And when we got back, he said, Mr. Fallon said, boy, you new fellas, you got a lot more experience at flying, formation flying than we do. Dad said, I didn't have any more experience than anybody else, but I was scared, and I was staying with that plane. He said, I also had blisters on my left hand from working the throttles. And he said, I decided I was either going to get back on that left-hand seat, or I was going to have to calm down. So, of course, my dad moved over to the left-hand seat. Dad had a lot of feeling for Paul, his first experienced pilot that he flew with, and he happened to be on Mr. Fallon's wing when he was shot down. The plane was on autopilot. Both wings were on fire, and the plane was on autopilot, and they were flying right there at his wing, counting the chutes that came out of the bomb bay. And Dad said, I moved the plane over 100 feet, and the navigator came on, and he said, you're not leaving him, are you? And Dad said, no, nobody's leaving anybody, but that plane is fixing to blow. And he said in the next second it did. My father's was on the August 1st Ploesti tidal wave mission, and he summed up his experience on that. He said, when you look out that window and you see black puffs and white puffs and gray puffs and red puffs, you know they're throwing everything at you they got. But he also said the experience and the training that they got for handling those large aircraft at 50 feet off the ground, he said, after that, I wasn't afraid of nothing. I could fly that plane just like a fighter. the one person that my father stayed in touch with after the war was his tail gunner. And he was a little fella named Edgar E. Huddleston. And there was a mission on July the 16th, where the plane was shot up, and the tail gunner's comments was that the pilot of the fighter plane must have wanted to collect the insurance and pay off his granddaddy's farm, because he just kept coming regardless of what the tail gunner was throwing at him. And so they shot each other simultaneously. The tail gunner was shot in the leg. At the same time, they figured the plane was about 30 feet behind the bomber when it exploded. So they weren't sure whether he was trying to ram or whether he was going to shoot him. But the tail gunner was put in the hospital, and his best friend was the waist gunner, an Alton Perry. And Alton went to the hospital and snuck his friend Huddleston out of the hospital for the tidal wave mission in August. He said, "We got a big mission coming up, and I don't want to fly with a greenhorn." He said, and so Huddleston was snuck out of the hospital and went on the Ploesti raid and was never given credit for it. He didn't get a medal and wasn't given credit for the mission. But so that's an interesting story. Not everyone has. My father completed his 50 missions and was given R&R was given a worn-out plane to take back to England for his R&R, and he flew back with Norman Appold, which he remembered the rest of his life. Norman was a squadron leader of the 514th Squadron, and that time that they spent together on the plane, my dad always considered Mr. Appold the bravest pilot and the most fearless that he ever knew, and he spoke of that. Dad was given, as most pilots were, they kept the best planes for combat. So he was given a worn-out plane, and on a night takeoff, fog, on takeoff, the prop governor broke. So the engine runs away, and the first thing you have to do is feather the engine. He continued down the runway and at takeoff speed, but as soon as he lifted off, the electrical problems, the instruments, all the lights went out in the plane, all the lights went out on the instruments. Unfortunately, there was a hill at the end of the runway. So my father figured what he did was to lean forward on the wheel to try and read the airspeed indicator in the dark, and when he did, he inadvertently dipped the wing, and the wing caught the top of the hill and crashed the plane. Later I asked him if there was anything that he could have done different, and he just said, "I could have chopped the power." And he said, "I would have lost my plane, but maybe I wouldn't have lost my crew." There were like 12 people, 14 people. He was carrying 5 passengers, and everyone was killed except for he, the co-pilot, and I think the navigator on that. And he said the rest of the crew was talking with the 5 passengers that they were fixing to take, but he said something told me I didn't want to know him. I didn't want to talk to him. He said I stayed busy doing the pre-flight, checking out the plane, and he said for some reason I didn't want to get to know him. He said he walked around, found all the bodies, put them together, popped a parachute and covered them up, and then passed out. And he said, you talk of people that have experienced out-of-body experiences. He said, it's like sliding down a silver thread, and you try and hold on to it and slow yourself down, but you can't. And he says, I slid down to where I was in a hallway, and at the end of the hallway was a room of light. And I walked into the lighted room, and he said there was a table, and around the table were my college professors that I had in OU. And I walked up to them, and they were having some sort of discussion. And they looked up and they saw me, and they said, what have you done to be here? And he said the only thing I could think was, I completed my 50 missions. And with that, he said, I heard a voice that said, I think this one's gone. And I opened my eyes, and there was a nurse leaning over me, and I knew I was alive again. So he completed his 50 missions and came back to this country. He admitted a little flak happy, and he lived an amazing life in a very unamazing manner. I think he carried the guilt of surviving for 50 years until I got him to this reunion. And when he met others that had similar experiences, and it wasn't a fault of his, it was a mechanical problem that had caused the crash and the loss of life. It wasn't his doings. That he finally put that burden down. And we heard that the Collins Foundation was flying in about 50 miles away from us. So we go to see the B-17 and the 24 that were flying. And we met a man from Oklahoma that was the pilot of the B-17. His name was Clark. He was from Idabel, Oklahoma. And so Mr. Clark, we started talking with him, and he was a pathfinder in the 8th Air Force. So he was the lead plane that dropped the marker on the target for the rest of the planes to follow. So Dad said, "Oh, well, you had your hands full." And the man asked Dad where he was, and Dad said North Africa. And the man asked, "Were you on tidal wave?" And Dad said, "Yes, I was." So Mr. Clark's eyes got real big, and he said, "Well, you had your hands full too." And Dad said, "Yes." He said, "Yes, we did." Mr. Clark said, "I guess it wasn't our time." And Dad says, "That's it." He said, "There were men over there that deserved to die." He said they were screw-ups from day one. Didn't pay attention in training, didn't pay attention in briefings, out all night. He said, but there were better men than me that didn't come back. He said, it just wasn't my time. So when I think of that, my father mentions times, I see that movie Always, where the pilot's killed and then he comes back as a spirit. And I think of my father because he talked about, he said they were real hard in training in 42. He said they were just looking for an excuse to wash you out. He said, I think they were harder at the beginning than they were at the end. And he said, I'm coming in, the pilot tells me to land at this field there on the left. And he said, I'm circling around. He said, but I knew I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to bring the plane around fast enough. And he said, I kicked the tail. I did a side slip, which I'd never done before. And the plane cuts in. I said, hey, that's it. So I kicked the rudder around some more and brought her in and set the plane down. When we got out, the instructor says, who taught you that? And Dad said, that's what I needed to do, wasn't it? And the pilot, the trainer, said, who taught you that? And Dad said, doesn't matter, does it? So on the Berry mission, he said, I got on the plane and I looked underneath the radio operator's table, and there was a fire extinguisher. He said it hadn't been there on the last mission. The ground crew had just put that in there. And he said, so we're on this mission and we were jumped by several fighters, and the tracers going through the plane shot up the antifreeze. That fluid that they use for the antifreeze in the wings was spilling inside the plane, and then the tracer set it afire. So we had a fire inside the plane. And so the radio operator comes on the intercom and says, we need some help fighting the fire. And he said, I've got the tracers from this fighter right behind me that are converging in front of the windshield, so I know exactly where the fighter's at. And I tell him, no, I fly the plane, you fight the fire. And he says, well, what do I do it with? And he says, you've got an extinguisher right under your table. Use it. And he said it hadn't been there the mission before. So Dad said that the co-pilot was beating on the steering wheel in fear and frustration, and the plane was on fire. And when I read the tail gunner's diary, he talks about that after shooting down the fighter and being shot in the leg, that he made a tourniquet with his headset and then dragged himself back towards the plane to try and get some help. But that everyone was so either shot up, wounded, or bugged out, scared, that he just lay there for a while before they finally calmed down, and his best friend, the tunnel gunner, came back to check on him. So after reading the diary, I went to my dad. I said, "How'd you keep your mind on your business?" And he said, "Well, everybody was scared. They had a right to be." He said, "We had somebody behind us that was trying to kill us." I said, "Yeah, but how did you keep your mind on your business?" And he said, "Well," he said, "the plane was on fire, and he said, they thought they were going to die." And he said, "I thought I was going to die too, but I wasn't done fighting yet." So my father got married to tell how much my father loved planes. One time in aggravation, my mother said, "I knew what I married. The day after I got married, I squeezed the tube in the middle of the tube." And he gets out of bed and he goes to the field to go get some time in B-17s because he had a chance to fly 17s. So she said, "I went back to the base." And they looked at me and they said, "What the heck are you doing here? You just got married." She says, "Charles went to fly, so no sense sitting around a room by myself." And I have a letter that my dad sent back to his parents, and he talks about the day after he got married that he went to this field because he had an opportunity to fly 17s, and here he bumps into his co-pilot that he hadn't seen for 3 years. And the co-pilot says, "What the heck?" You know, my dad says, "I just got married." And the co-pilot looks at him like he's crazy. "What are you doing here?" But he had a feeling for his co-pilot and was glad to see him. And the co-pilot said, "They gave me a plane to fly from England back to here." And he said, "You know, I never had taken off." And the other co-pilot, never had taken off. Neither one of us had been at the controls on takeoff. So I just did what you told me, and everything worked out fine. And Dad said, "Well, I'm glad you did, but that's the first time you ever listened to me." But my father was very proud of his service, and he didn't fly his flag, but I remember I was sitting at a table. He had congestive heart failure, so he's trying to lose some weight, and he had a bowl of oatmeal that he was eating not too enthusiastically. And there were two other veterans there at the table, and he's not with them. He's just sitting there at the table eating. And one fellow was running his mouth talking about how he was assigned to this captain, and he drove his Jeep, and that's all he did. Anytime they tried to give him any duty, he just told that captain, he just told him, "You just see the captain. All I got to do is work for him." And he said, "I drove a Jeep, and that's all I did all the war. And I got to be a sergeant." This other fellow sitting over there saying, "Well, I tried to avoid the draft as long as I could, but they finally got me, and I wound up being out there at Arizona, and I raised weather balloons, and I got to be a corporal." And my dad's eating. One of them turned and said, "Were you in the war, Doc?" Dad said, "Yes, I was." "What rank did you get to be?" And you heard the other fellow talk about, what did he call it, a tombstone promotion? Tombstone commission. Well, my father was a major when he went out, but he always referred to himself as captain. And when I found out, I said, "How come you never call yourself a major?" He said, "I got that behind a desk." He said, "I got a captain in a plane." So if you ever asked him, he would tell you that he made it to a captain's rank. So he told the fella, he says, "I was a captain." And the fella said, "Oh, was you a 90-day wonder? Is that what you was, one of them 90-day wonders?" and the spoon just paused in midair, and he finished it, stuck it in the bowl, and got up and walked out. I grabbed the ticket, paid it, caught my dad walking to the truck on the way out, and I said, I wished you could have seen your face, Dad. I could just see you keying up the tail gunner, telling 2-second bursts on both these idiots. They're too dumb to live. That was wonderful. But I would read one more thing here. My father wrote in 1990. We had a new preacher, and she asked for everyone to put down their favorite Bible stories. And this is what my father wrote. And I think he had the Berry mission in July of '43 on his mind when he did. It says, John chapter 9:25 tells of the blind man's response to the Jewish leader's questions. I don't know whether he is good or bad, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind, and now I see. The wonders of God are beyond my ability to explain or understand, and his plan for dealing with the civilizations which have been and now exist is not clear to me. However, I am aware of several times in my life when in response to fright and prayer, a superior power has been present to direct my actions or present suggestions. I am also aware that this help can be refused, but if acted upon, will result in miracles.
Thank you, Kim.
You betcha.
Thanks for taking the time to bring the memories of your father in here.
Thank you.